when talking about at-height work, fall protection is obviously the first thing that comes to mind, but there's that's kind of the only tip of the iceberg. So regardless of what type of work you're doing, according to OSHA, you have to have those certain systems in place to prevent falls from anything while you're working. So we're talking about anchorage points, connectors, full body harnesses in any industry. But the final piece to a safety plan is knowing what to do in case a fall does occur. That's where rescue comes into play. So can you walk us through, at the most basic level, what rescue means?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I really appreciate that you mentioned that the rescue is just the tip of the iceberg, and that you mentioned all those other aspects like fall protection plans and anchorages and PPE, because really those are the really important parts that are the precursors to doing a rescue. So doing appropriate safety planning, selecting the proper PPE, doing training, identifying safe anchorages to use, those all are part of the safety plan. People love talking about rescues and practicing rescues and training rescues, and that's the sexy part of the world that we live in. But ideally, you do all those other steps beforehand and hopefully never actually have to do a rescue.
Sure.
When it comes to doing the actual rescue, I like to think about the at-height environment. The rescues are pretty much just a transportation problem. We have an injured worker who's at height, and we need to get them somewhere where EMS can render care. A lot of times, if you were to take that same injury or that same illness and put that person on a sidewalk in an urban environment, you as the rescuer would just call 911 and sit there and wait for the paramedics to show up.
Right.
But us working in the at-height environment, it's usually our responsibility to get that patient from point A to point B.
Sure. So like, for instance, if someone were to have a heart attack while they're on a structure or working at height, that's a lot different scenario if you're, at a restaurant and EMS can just walk up and render aid.
Exactly. Yeah, us as the workers at height, 99% of our problem is getting that person where they can have aid rendered to them. And sometimes that's 100% of the problem that needs to be solved. For example, somebody who's fallen and is hanging in free space on a Y lanyard, but is otherwise uninjured, 100% of the problem is just getting them back onto the structure so they can get back on their own feet and climb down.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes complete sense. So what are the various steps of a rescue plan?
Sure. So I think of it as a kind of a two-step process. There's the prep work that you do before you even set foot on site, and then there's the work that you do when you're on site. So as far as the prep work, that's things like looking at your job site, figuring out all the hazards that you'll encounter, all the places where somebody could get injured, and what your plan is for getting that person from their point of injury to EMS personnel, to developing your safety kit, figuring out all the equipment that you'll need to bring on site with you to get that person from point A to point B. And then one final really important part of the prep work is figuring out how you're going to enact EMS. So if you are, again, in an urban environment, you might be able to just call 911 from anywhere. But if you're working on a tower out in the middle of nowhere, enacting the EMS chain might involve climbing down a tower, driving 5 or 10 miles down a dirt road to get cell phone service. So knowing all that information and being prepared before you even set foot on the job site is really important. So that's kind of the prep work side of things before you set foot on the job site. And then once you set foot on the job site, there's some prep work that you can do in the morning, like adequate job safety briefing, making sure all the workers know what they're doing, what they do in the case of an emergency, what hazards are present on the job site, and then where the first aid and rescue kit is stored. And then kind of the final piece of the puzzle is, what do you do in the event of a rescue itself? And if that happens and you've done all the other prep work, it should be a pretty easy process of grabbing the rescue kit and doing what you practiced and are prepared for.
Well, and you mentioned for that rescue plan, knowing that every person on the job site knows what the plan is, knows what their role is, if person A gets injured and person B has to rescue, or vice versa, right?
Exactly. Yeah, so I like to think about the actual rescue procedure in terms of what EMS providers think of as the scene size up. And the scene size up has 3 categories to it. You have your safety as the rescuer. By far, that's the #1 most important thing, that if you are one of the rescue personnel, you want to make sure that you don't get yourself injured and turn yourself into a victim. Second is the mechanism of injury. You want to know how the person got injured or how they got themselves stuck in a situation. And finally, third, we want to know what rescue resources we need, so that when we call 911, that we can relay the appropriate needs to the first responders.